And we are live. So thank you so much for joining us out there on YouTube and Facebook. And I'm very excited to be joined today by Alex Hermstad, who is a musician among many other things. And so I'm excited to hear about your journey, Alex. Thank you so much for joining me.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
So we met through Kimberly Maska's Spiritual Biz Coaching Program. And at the time, if I recall correctly, correct me if I'm wrong, you weren't necessarily considering yourself an artist. Is that true? Or an artist first?
Yeah, not an artist first, I guess. I like that word, I feel like has, I don't know, like it's like, I haven't given myself the permission to identify as that because it hasn't been the main thing that I'm doing at any given time. But I feel like if I engage with art, that makes me an artist, right? So, yeah.
Absolutely. Fascinating. So tell me about your background, basically, about how you kind of got to where you are today. And tell us introduce Alex to us all.
Yeah.
Actually, tell us how you kind of came to realizing you were an artist.
Yeah. So like I've been playing music since I was young. It was always like just something I did for fun. I had like keyboards and stuff that I would just mess around on and play with all the different sounds and all that. And in middle school around that time was when I started learning formally, and my first instrument was the trombone, and I played in jazz band and orchestra and all that. And then kind of as I got into high school, I was kind of rebelling against the authorities of music, and I just like, it felt like it was becoming a chore, and I feel like I lost that connection that I had when I was young, and I was just kind of messing around on the keyboard, and it was fun. And so in high school, I dropped music completely. And by the end of high school, I'm 18. I'm like, what am I going to do with my life? And, you know, kind of that thought flashed by of like art and music, but I was like, that's not, I haven't done it. Like that's in my past. I'm like, I'm moving on. It's time to be responsible and kind of do something. Yeah. And that's what it felt like, was like, I was considering doing like music school, or animation was something I was interested in as well. And, but then I was kind of looking at that time at all these stories of these millennials that went to art school, went to music school, and they were poor and broke and working at coffee shops. And I was like, that sounds awful. I don't want that to be my life. I'm going to do something that makes me a lot of money. And so I studied computer science in school, and that was kind of my thing. But at the end of high school, the first thing that I did when I was graduating was start taking piano lessons, and it felt very important for me to do. And in fact, I wrote myself a letter, you know, those services that you can like write yourself a letter and then it'll like email it to you like in a year. Like I wrote myself this letter, and it was, I said a bunch of things, but one of the things was like, hey, look, like start taking piano lessons. It's not too late. You're not too old. You can still get back into it. It'll be this thing. So it just felt like this very important thing for me to do. And so, yeah, so I started playing piano when I was 18. I played for a couple years, and as school started to pick up, I was in a place where I feel like it didn't have room in my life anymore, and I let it fade away again and kind of went through all the computer science stuff, and that was my life for some time. And when I got out of university, again, the first thing, like once I got settled, it was like, okay, I need to find a piano teacher. I need to get a piano. I need to like get this back in my life. Yeah. Do you have any questions so far?
Yeah. Oh my gosh, there's so much there. Are you kidding me? Because, you know, I love this development. My book is about the artist development. And so the first thing that stuck out to me was that this idea of being turned off by music in school because of the structure, Would you say was that kind of what it was? It was a little too structured for you and it kind of took the fun out of it?
Yeah, the structure, and I feel like there was a lack of freedom, I guess. Yeah.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, and that's interesting to me in part because I interviewed another musician, Dave Law, who was earlier in this Another Way podcast series. He kind of felt the same thing. He felt that being a musician meant a certain thing, and he didn't want that thing. Like you said, being responsible. You felt like that wouldn't be the responsible route to take. So it's interesting to me because I think that in some ways that's an epidemic in our country, though, because what happens is we are in effect discouraging artists, I think, is what that results to, And I love that you actually came back to it because clearly there was a passion there that led you back to it. So tell me that, like, what has about that, like, what has drawn you to music?
Yeah, it's interesting. Like, when I was younger, I really didn't know. I was just like, oh, this is something, like I rationalized it in different ways. And I was like, this is just, this is like, it's good for my brain. It's like just something it makes me happy, like that's a big part of it. But in the last couple of years, I've felt a deeper connection, kind of like a spiritual connection to it. And I think for me, music, and especially improvising and just kind of creating stuff with music, it's like it's like it allowed me to see my soul, or like my higher self or something like that in a way that I had never seen before. And it was just a really powerful experience, and it made me realize that I was greater than I was. It totally just expanded my conception of who I was. Ever since I had, like, this was like a couple of years ago that I had this kind of, it was like a kind of a spiritual music awakening experience. And ever since then, it's like that the whole discipline thing that I really struggled with in high school, and even when I was first learning to play piano, that discipline it just comes naturally now, because I feel like I'm communing with my soul, like I'm doing what my soul is wanting me to do. And it's like, it's just this really comforting kind of thing to be able to have that interaction with my soul, or with whatever it is. Sometimes it feels like it's other beings, angels and stuff like that. So yeah, that's my prime motivation right now. Yeah.
Oh, that's beautiful. And it's also a great testimonial to why I think we need to support the freedom in music more, and I think part of, for fear of getting political, which I don't want to do, but I think part of the arts education in schools, because of the lack of funding and because we've lost that kind of passion, teaching teaching the awakening through music, like that's just so beautiful. And so, which actually kind of brings us nicely to this idea of multidimensional music, right? So how did you discover this multidimensional component, and how did you define it multidimensional?
Yeah, well, it's a new term that I'm still working out. Like multidimensional is one of the ways I've said it. Holistic is another way of saying it, I feel like. And so it all came to be a couple of years back when I was having these really intense musical experiences. What brought that on was I met my teacher, David Christie, up in Seattle, and he had this really powerful way of teaching music, which he sort of restructured the goal of a music education, which was where in traditional classical, it's like, it's structured to kind of train you to be a concert pianist as quickly as possible. And it's based a lot around excellence and just, yeah, performance, right? Which is good in a way. And it's produced a lot of really masterful pianists for sure, but it doesn't take into account a lot in the individual. Like really, for most of us that might want to get into music, or for me anyway, the prime thing is the emotional connection and the joy that you feel when playing it. And it's like that is kind of left by the wayside in traditional education, because there's this focus on excellence and kind of performance and stuff. And so when I met David, he was showing me this, and he was showing me his way of teaching, which was like, you know, I would call it holistic in the sense that he was taking into account my entire being, and not just he didn't just have this goal. He had this deeper intention of like, we're here to bring the music to you, and we're here to connect you to it. We're going to do that in the way that serves your emotions, and it's not serving some protocol or some method or something like that. It's like, he's like, no, it's driven by your emotions and your desires. His way of teaching, and this is where the multidimensionality kind of comes in, is like, where in traditional music education, you're kind of on this linear track kind of, and you have this goal, like maybe you want to play Moonlight Sonata or something, you have like these really complex pieces that you have. And so then it's just like, you have this kind of one track mind, like, I know that I want to play this piece, I'm going to work, and then the teacher will sort of get you to that point and give you the pieces so you can get to that place. Mm-hmm. And with David, he was like, okay, so the goal here, you might think it's, you want to play this piece or you want to do this, but really the goal is for you to deepen your emotional connection to the music. And we're going to use all the tools that we have to do that. And so instead of just one track, now we're taking this holistic approach where you're not just focused on one aspect, you're focused on many different aspects. And I'll pause there because it's right. Complicated.
Yeah, no, interesting. So you're talking about tapping into your emotional self through the music, and would you say that you're letting your emotional self guide the music? Like, is it an improv kind of thing, or is it a style? Is it more on style?
When I say the emotions are guiding it, I'm kind of speaking on a more like macro level, in the sense that the emotions and your desires are guiding your education. So like what you spend time doing should have a direct connection to your desire and to, just to what you want and what feels enjoyable to do. So it doesn't mean that you're improvising necessarily. When you're playing, say, like sheet music, when you're in those moments and you're playing that music, you're in touch with your emotions, you're in touch with your creative expression, even in simple pieces, right? You never lose that connection. Just because you're not playing Moonlight Sonata, just because you're playing a one-page thing in this intro book, you can still tap into that deep emotional connection that's within you.
And how do you do that? Is there a practice that you do to get into that zone, or how do you channel it?
Yeah, so I mean, the first thing is to not play stuff that's easy enough for you to play, that you're not using your mind too much. So one of the unique things about David's practice is that he will give you a much higher volume of easier pieces. You'll spend a lot longer in some of the earlier levels, whereas in other things you would be wanting to go further so that you could get to play Moonlight Sonata faster. And his thing is spend time in these easier pieces, because that's where you feel emotionally connected. That's where you can. And then the other part of it is you have to open yourself up to the idea that even in this very simple piece, that you can experience an emotional connection, and that it actually is a profound piece of music, and not just think, oh, this is just a piece for babies, like I don't need to take this seriously. But even in like the very, very most introductory things, it's like there's something there. There's something, the music there is real music, and you can lean into that expression with very simple things, and feel and get that emotional joy. Yeah.
Got it. Yeah. And we've talked about, the power, just the power of music, and being able to kind of channel that at any level. Music is music, and the power of music is the power of music. And so I guess that it seems to me that this like multidimensional level is almost a version of like, I say zoom into the moment and like stay present. Because I think in some ways is kind of what you're saying. Like when you can really lean into the simplicity of what you're playing in that exact moment, you are like opening yourself up in some way, as I guess maybe to this channel, and you're able to channel the power of this music through your soul almost. Would you say that's accurate?
Yeah, definitely. I think, yeah, any time that you're playing music and it feels like you have that passion to like feel something, that like feel that creative expression from anything. I think that's your soul speaking, or
Yes.
what I like to say. I think there's, sometimes it feels like other beings. It really feels like some external thing, because it's like, whoa, that's like, I haven't felt like that in a long time. Like it feels so external sometimes. Yeah.
Yeah, incredible. And again, this definitely applies, this reminds me of Eckhart Tolle's work, just about staying present, and really appreciating it. And so I love that messaging. So have you started kind of teaching an approach to this, or are you still right now just really exploring it for yourself?
Yeah, so I'm kind of like an apprentice teacher for David, and yeah, I work closely with him to develop this messaging out. Like he doesn't, he only realized, like he's been teaching for decades, and this is developed over time, and he's now realized, hey, this is kind of different from how things are done in normal education, and so yeah, so I'm helping him with that, and teaching.
Well, that's exciting. So this is all kind of, you heard it here first, folks. This is kind of, you're developing this new, another way, if you will. That's why I knew you were perfect for this. That's really exciting. I love it. And now what do you say to the people who come, who say, like for instance, I had a friend whose 5-year-old, I was homeschooling during the pandemic, who obviously I was close with. And I said, we need to get this kid a guitar, because, I'm big into guitars. I'm like, we need him to learn guitar. And she said, no, she comes from a music family. She says, well, actually, I want him to learn violin first, because something about the way you learn an instrument, it will help him later down the line to play guitar if he learns violin first. So I don't understand all those dynamics of it, but I think she would probably come from this frame of thought of thinking that the fundamentals that we have kind of referenced as slightly boring, but important. So she believed, that structure is essential to later. And, some people would say, like, you have to learn the rules to break the rules. So can you speak to, like, do you believe there is still value in the traditional structure? Or do you think it complements your work? Or do you think you should just throw it all out the window? Like, what do you think?
No, I think there's a lot of value in the traditional structure. The main difference is that it's just a bit slower, and we're not trying to turn everyone into Mozart at the cost of their emotional well-being. And so many kids have these awful experiences taking piano lessons because their parents want them to be Mozart, and they have these really strict teachers, and then they come out of that with this distaste of music in their mouth because they got burnt out. And so really the main difference with this is that we're saying, hey, like, really the most important thing is the student's emotional well-being. It doesn't mean, and like David has kids that are virtuoso pianists that have gone through his method, and so it's like, it's not to say that it holds anyone back. It's just, it goes at the pace that they choose to go. That's the main.
I love that. It adjusts to their level. Oh, I really like that a lot. Yeah, because I will say for me, I was in piano lessons when I was like 7 or 8 maybe, and my mom pulled me out because I wouldn't practice, you know, and I still to this day will attempt to play the piano. I mean, I can play very simple things like Moonlight Sonata actually, but not all the way through. You know, like Fairlice, whatever. And again, like I'm terrible, but you know, part of me is upset that she pulled me out, but she pulled me out because I couldn't stick to the structure. And she said, if you don't practice, I'm going to pull you out. If you don't practice, like, you know, enough to be meeting and I had the workbooks, you know, and I had to like meet that structure level. It was too tight for me, basically. And so I love this idea of slowing down, because I think if it had been introduced to me as, you know, okay, if you don't want to rehearse 4 times a week, maybe you only want to rehearse 1 time a week, then we'll just slow everything down. Like, I don't even understand why everyone doesn't do that. It's part of just adjusting to different people. Everyone's different.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And that's part of why I'm so passionate about helping David get his message out there. Cause I'm like, why isn't this just the way that we do things? Yeah. Why, like, I would have loved to have that when I first started piano. The other thing that I'll say is that it's about going slower, and then it's also the other important thing about it is it's desire based, right? So it's like I had this thing, like I love to use the pedal, right? Like the pedal is like this in the piano, and it kind of adds all this resonance and kind of bleeds all the notes together, and it sounds pretty. And with my first teacher, she's like, oh, you have to like play it like it's on the page and use the pedal like as it's written. And then with David, he was like, I noticed that he just kind of uses it whenever and just kind of uses it as it feels good to him. And that's something that he imparted to me, was like, it really doesn't matter what's on the page. Just do what feels good to you. And that's how you learn things. Cause that's the other thing. It helps you learn faster in this weird way when you're doing something that is connected to your desires. It just helps you learn faster. So it's like, even if it's not to the protocol, it's not to the Suzuki piano, whatever, if your emotions are involved and your desires involved, you're going to fly through these things that might have taken you a long time if you were just like doing it because you had to, or because your teacher said so.
Fascinating. So would you say it's like, instead of learning the rules to break the rules, you're breaking the rules to learn the rules?
I think that's a great way of putting it. Yeah.
Wow, I love that. Oh God, that is hashtag another way, by the way. You know, I love that. I really love it. I think it's really exciting. So we're going to wrap up here, but tell me how music this whole process for you and music in general has really like transformed your life.
Yeah. So something that's really cool with music, and another way that I consider it kind of multidimensional, is it taps me into this mastery frequency where, like, so for example, like one of the things, like when you're learning a piece, you know, you're going to play through the whole piece, and there's going to be certain measures that are like the things that are the hardest ones, and like the rest of it, more or less, you can play pretty easily. When you're practicing, you have this kind of push and pull between like, oh, like I really want to just play these parts that feel good, but I know that I have these measures that are like uncomfortable that I need to sit in and like do, and that's how I'm going to get better. That's how I'm going to learn the piece and keep going. And it's this like this kind of short-term gratification versus long delayed gratification thing. And experiencing that in music, I feel like is a training ground for that in all other elements of your life. And like I noticed when I started to really lean into that and be like, okay, no, I'm just going to tackle these hard measures. I'm going to really do that. Then like in school, like I'd be more inclined to just start the hard homework earlier instead of procrastinating and stuff like that. And so there's a lot of examples like that in music where it's helped me kind of overcome psychological struggles in this container that is that's very, very enjoyable to do, and kind of have those benefits proliferate to other areas of my life.
Oh, I love that. That's so beautiful. And it reminds me of Jujutsu.
Yeah.
Did you ever end up looking? You said you were exploring that at some point.
Yeah.
Did you see similarities there in kind of what you're saying?
100%. Like what they say in Jujutsu is like it's this practice of consciousness of your body, right? And it's like it's a battle, not like against the person you're fighting against, but with yourself, and how you're able to use your consciousness to get your body to do things. And so it's this exercise in consciousness, and it's the same way on piano. It's like you have to apply this consciousness, and you're going to overcome all these like limiting beliefs about yourself and like what your body can do. And so I think it's common in a lot of these physical practices. Like yoga is another one that I find to be very similar in that way. But I think music is especially interesting because it just brings your consciousness to your body, and just kind of transforms what you think you can do and what you're capable of.
To the present moment.
Yeah.
Right here, right now, where we are right now. So thank you so much for sharing your journey with us, everything you've learned, and this new perspective. I really appreciate this perspective. Parents who have kids who are fighting them, but they would really like them to learn, this would be an excellent way to get them inspired by music. And actually, speaking of which, I did just want to ask this question. I'm curious about your parents and how supportive they were, because I think that is also something that for a lot of people, they either blame their parents, like arguably I did with my mom, for pulling me out of piano lessons, or their parents are just not supportive. And so you have really come around to music in your own way, which I think is beautiful. So how supportive have your parents been?
Yeah, super supportive. With my mom, like we both kind of we were kind of coming back around to our art at the same time. And it was kind of this kind of dual journey that we got to have, where we were both like, had it in the past, and kind of re-arriving back to that. And so, just a lot of good positive feedback there. Yeah.
Oh, I love that. It's beautiful. Awesome. Well, thank you again. Any final words?
Yeah, I just want to plug my podcast for anyone.
Oh, yes. Oh my gosh. Let's take a minute for that. Tell us. I'm so sorry. I almost forgot. There was so much good stuff here. Tell us about your podcast. I want to take the time to hear about that.
Yeah, it's called The Dapper Life Show is the name of the podcast. I'm going to be talking about like music and stuff there, but it's really kind of a lifestyle podcast, and I'm going to be talking about just everything that I do to manifest beauty in my life. And and so there's 4 episodes there right now. It's a relatively new podcast, but if you're interested in learning more about this music stuff, or just kind of general lifestyle stuff, check it out. I'm sure we'll have the link in the description.
Yeah, it sounds fascinating. I can't wait to hear it myself. Okay, cool. Thank you so much, Alex. It's been a pleasure. And of course, my final words is there is always another way. And so thank you for sharing your way with us. I will see you next time.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.